I should have left the moment I saw my own face in that photograph. Not a selfie I'd taken, not some reflection or trick of light. My actual face, staring back at me from a family portrait I'd walked past 100 times, a portrait of people I'd never met, in clothes I'd never worn, standing in a room I'd never entered. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because the details matter. They always do in stories like this. And I need you to understand exactly how I ended up trapped in a house that turned out to be one giant camera, slowly developing me into its permanent collection. My name is Alex, and 3 weeks ago, I was just another broke college graduate drowning in student loans, scrolling through gig apps at 2 in the morning because sleep felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. That's when I found the listing. House sitter needed for Victorian estate. 3 weeks, $3,000. Must be comfortable with solitude and follow house rules. $3,000 for 3 weeks of doing essentially nothing. I'd been working double shifts at a coffee shop for minimum wage, living in an apartment with walls so thin I could hear my neighbor's Netflix choices. This felt like winning the lottery. I should have known better. Easy money is never easy. The listing was on one of those peer-to-peer task apps, the kind where people post odd jobs. Dog sitting, furniture assembly, that sort of thing. The account belonged to someone named Margaret Harrow. Her profile had 5-star reviews, though when I looked closer, they were all oddly generic. Great experience. House was lovely. Very clear communication. Not a single review that felt ... real. My friend Josh texted me when I showed him the listing. Dude, that's creepy money. What's the catch? Maybe she's rich and paranoid, I typed back. Needs someone to water plants and make sure the pipes don't freeze. Or it's a murder house and you're the next victim in a true crime podcast. I laughed. If I die, at least my loans die with me. Dark humor. That was my coping mechanism back then. Now it just feels prophetic. I applied that night. By morning, I had a response not from Margaret Harrow herself, but from her assistant through the app's messaging system. The message was formal, almost scripted. Miss Harrow is currently overseas, attending to family business, and cannot conduct in-person interviews. If you can start immediately, the position is yours. Rules and payment information will be provided upon arrival. The address is 1847 Ashwood Lane. Do not use GPS. Follow the handwritten directions that will be left at the post office. Something about that message bothered me, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Maybe it was the formality. Maybe it was the weird instruction about the post office. But I needed the money badly enough to ignore my instincts. I picked up the directions. 2 days later, they were in a sealed envelope, written in precise, old-fashioned cursive on cream-colored paper that smelled faintly of chemicals like developer fluid from a dock. The directions led me out of town, down increasingly rural roads, past farms and forests that seemed to swallow the afternoon light. When I finally found Ashwood Lane, my phone signal died completely. The road was unpaved, more of a suggestion than an actual street, winding through dense woods that felt older than they should. And then the trees opened up, and I saw it. The house was beautiful in that unsettling way that Victorian architecture can be. 3 stories, dark wood siding that had been recently painted, wraparound porch with ornate railings, tower room on the left side with a widow's walk on top. It looked like it belonged on a postcard, except for one detail that made my stomach clench. Every single window had curtains drawn, and the house sat in perfect stillness. No birds in the trees nearby, no insects buzzing, just silence. I parked in the gravel driveway and sat there for a full minute, hands on the steering wheel, telling myself this was fine. This was just a job. A weird, overpaid job, but still just a job. The front door was unlocked. A note was taped to the inside handle. "Welcome, Alex. I apologize for not greeting you in person. My travels have been unexpectedly extended. Everything you need is provided. Please read the house rules carefully. Payment will be transferred upon successful completion of your duties. My assistant will check in via text periodically. Margaret Harrow." Below that, a list of rules. House rules. Do not enter the attic under any circumstances. Do not move or rearrange any photographs. All lights must be off by midnight. Do not open curtains on the east-facing windows. If you hear scratching in the walls, ignore it. The basement door should remain locked at all times. Do not invite anyone to the property. Be honest with the house. That last rule stopped me cold. Be honest with the house. Not with Margaret, with the house. I laughed nervously, folding the note and stuffing it in my pocket. Rich people were eccentric. That was all this was. Eccentric rich person rules. The interior was immaculate. Hardwood floors polished to a mirror shine. Antique furniture that looked both expensive and uncomfortable. And photographs. So many photographs. They lined every hallway, covered every available wall space, crowded the mantel above the fireplace. Family photos spanning what looked like decades, maybe even a century. Black and white portraits from the early 1900s, faded color photos from the 70s, glossy modern prints from recent years. I spent that first hour just walking through the house, getting my bearings. The layout was maze-like, with rooms that connected in unexpected ways, hallways that seemed longer than they should be, and doors that led to spaces that didn't match the exterior dimensions. A side effect of Victorian architecture, I told myself. Old houses were weird. The kitchen was stocked with fresh groceries. My bedroom on the second floor was comfortable enough, and the Wi-Fi password was on another note by the router. Exposure 1847. I connected my laptop, sent Josh a text that I'd arrived safely, and tried to ignore the creeping feeling that the house was watching me. That first night was uneventful. I made dinner, watched Netflix on my laptop, and went to bed early. The silence was oppressive. No traffic sounds, no neighbors, nothing but the occasional creak of old wood settling. I left the hallway light on, breaking rule number 3 without really thinking about it, and fell asleep listening to my own breathing. I woke up at 3:17 a.m. to complete darkness. The hallway light was off. I distinctly remembered leaving it on. Old house, I whispered to myself. Probably a faulty bulb or bad wiring. But my heart was pounding, and I couldn't fall back asleep for hours. The next day was fine, sunny, even. I explored the property's several acres of overgrown gardens and a detached garage that housed what looked like an antique car under a tarp. I texted Josh, caught up on emails, and tried not to think about how isolated I was. 3 weeks would pass quickly. I just needed to follow the rules and collect my money. Day 3 was when things started to feel wrong. I was in the hallway between the living room and the main staircase, the one absolutely crammed with family photos. When I stopped in front of a large portrait I'd passed dozens of times, it showed what appeared to be the Harrow family from maybe the 1950s. Father, 3 children, and a grandmother, all posed formally in front of the fireplace in this very house. Except now there were 5 children in the photo. I blinked, leaned closer, convinced I'd miscounted before. But no, I distinctly remembered 3 kids, 2 girls and a boy. Now there were 3 girls and 2 boys, and the 5th child, A young girl in a white dress was standing slightly behind the others, face tilted down so her features were blurred. "You're tired," I said aloud, and my voice sounded too loud in the silent house. "You miss, that's all." But I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the portrait, just to prove to myself I wasn't losing it. Then I continued through the house, trying to shake off the unease. That afternoon, I found myself checking the photos on my phone, comparing it to the actual portrait on the wall. They matched. 5 children. Maybe I really had miscounted. Maybe exhaustion was messing with my perception. But then, on day 4, I walked past a wedding photo in the dining room one I'd glanced at before and froze. There was a shadow in the background, a tall, dark shape standing behind the wedding party, featureless and still. I was absolutely certain it hadn't been there before. I'd noticed this photo specifically because the bride's dress was so elaborate, and the background had been empty except for the church altar. I took another picture with my phone, then I went back through my camera roll to the photos I'd taken while touring the house on day 1. I found the wedding photo in one of my initial shots. The shadow wasn't there. My hands started shaking. I took a third photo right then, side by side with the framed picture. Same shadow, same location. Undeniable. "Okay," I breathed. "Okay, this is some kind of art installation. Maybe the frames have digital displays, some kind of smart picture frame technology that cycles through different versions." It sounded ridiculous even as I said it, but the alternative was worse. That night, I heard the scratching. It came from inside the walls, rhythmic and persistent, like nails on wood. The rule had said to ignore it, but ignoring it felt impossible when it moved, starting near the ceiling in my bedroom, traveling down the wall across to the hallway, following me as I tried to outpace it. I called Josh. "The pictures are changing," I told him, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know how this sounds, but I've got photo evidence. They're literally different from day to day." "Maybe it's like one of those escape room houses," Josh suggested. He sounded distracted, probably gaming. "Like immersive horror experience stuff. Rich people do weird things. This doesn't feel like entertainment. You're getting paid $3,000 to sit in a nice house. Worst case, it's creepy. Best case, you've got a wild story. Just stick it out, man." I wanted to believe him, I really did. Day 5. I woke up to find every single photo frame in the hallway turned backward, facing the wall. I hadn't done it. I'd been asleep. I was alone in the house. I stood there, staring at dozens of frames all turned around, and felt my breath catch. Slowly, hands shaking, I turned one around. The family portrait. Still 5 children, but now the 5th child's face was raised, and I could see her features clearly. She looked terrified. I turned another frame, the wedding photo. The shadow had moved closer to the bride and groom. Another. A Christmas morning scene from the 1980s. One of the children was holding a present, but their eyes were completely black, and they were staring directly at the camera with an expression of pure horror. I turned them all back around, one by one, because what else could I do? But my hands wouldn't stop shaking, and by the time I was done, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was a Polaroid on the floor, face down, as if someone had slid it under my bedroom door. I picked it up, already knowing it was going to be bad. It was a photo of me, asleep in bed, taken from the doorway of my room last night, while I was sleeping in a supposedly empty house. I grabbed my phone, pulled up Margaret Harrow's contact, and called. It went straight to voicemail. I tried her assistance number from the app. Same thing. I sent a text. I need to talk to you immediately. Something's wrong with the house. No response. I spent the rest of that day researching. I googled 1847 Ashwood Lane, Margaret Harrow, Harrow family, anything I could think of. Most searches came up empty, but I finally found something buried in a local historical society's digitized newspaper archives.a. Headline from 1962, Harrow Estate Fire Claims 3 Lives. The article was brief. A fire had broken out in what was then called the Harrow Estate, killing Margaret Harrow, a woman in her 60s, and 2 others whose names were redacted. The cause was listed as undetermined. The property had been rebuilt, and subsequent owners had maintained the Harrow name out of respect for the original family. So Margaret Harrow was dead, had been dead for over 60 years. But someone or something had been texting me as her. I went down a rabbit hole after that, searching house-sitting forums, Reddit threads, anywhere people might have posted about strange experiences. That's when I found it. A deleted Reddit account's cached comment from 2 years ago. Working a house-sitting gig that started normal but got weird fast. The photos in the house keep changing. Just found one of me from yesterday in the attic. Getting out tomorrow. If anyone sees a listing for 1847 Ashwood Lane, don't take it. Don't trust the photos. They're not memories, they're invitations. The post had been deleted, but the user's comment history showed they'd been active for years, before abruptly going silent after that comment. That's when I made my first real mistake. I decided to check the attic. Rule number 1 was explicit. Do not enter the attic under any circumstances. But I needed to know what was up there. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. The attic door was on the 3rd floor, at the end of a narrow hallway I'd been avoiding because it felt wrong, colder than the rest of the house. Darker even with the lights on. The door was plain white wood with a crystal doorknob. Nothing special about it, except for the sensation of dread that washed over me. When I touched the handle, it wasn't locked. The attic stairs were steep and narrow. As I climbed, the temperature rose dramatically. It was October, cold outside, but the attic was sweltering, humid, like a greenhouse. The smell hit me before I reached the top: chemicals and something organic. Decay mixed with developer fluid. The attic was a dark room, or rather, an archive masquerading as a dark room. Photographs covered every surface, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They hung from clotheslines, crisscrossing the space, were pinned to the walls, lay in piles on tables and the floor. Some were ancient glass plates from the Victorian era, others were Polaroids, most were modern digital prints. But here's what made me want to run. They all showed the same house. This house, across different eras, with different families, but always the same building, same layout, same frames on the walls. Each collection followed a pattern. First photo, a family moving in, smiling, hopeful. Then candid shots of them living their lives. Then the photos got stranger, forced poses, unnatural expressions, and finally, always, a last photo showing the entire family together, faces blurred, with a tall, featureless figure standing behind them. Every family ended the same way. I found the most recent collection pinned to a corkboard. A family from 2019. Father, mother, teenage daughter. The progression was there. Arrival, happy meals, then fear creeping into their expressions, and finally the last photo, all 3 of them standing rigid in the living room, faces obscured and the figure behind them. And next to that board was another section, dozens of individual photos, people alone, each one labeled with dates and names. Emily Rodriguez house, sitter 2018. Marcus Chun house, sitter 2020. Samantha, Right House Sitter 2023. The pattern was consistent. 7 to 10 photos per person showing their gradual realization of horror, ending with the same final pose standing in the living room, face blurred, the figure present. Then I saw my own name on an empty corkboard section with today's date at the top. Below it, 3 photos already pinned. The first showed me arriving at the house, getting out of my car. The second showed me sleeping the same angle as the Polaroid I'd found. The third showed me earlier today, standing in front of the changed family portrait, looking confused. There were pushpin holes for 7 more photos, empty spaces waiting to be filled. I stumbled backward, knocking into one of the tables, and my hand landed on something wet, a plastic tray filled with developer fluid, still warm. Photos floated in the chemical bath, still processing. I pulled one out with shaking hands. It was me, standing in the attic, right now, looking at the developed photos of myself. A photograph of this exact moment, taken from behind, showing me from an angle that was impossible because I was alone. I dropped it and ran. I half fell down the attic stairs, sprinted through the hallway, and didn't stop until I was in my room with the door locked. My phone buzzed. A text from Margaret Harrow. "Did you move the photographs?" My fingers shook as I typed back. "No, everything's fine." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared, then, "Good. The house prefers honesty, but I suppose we all have our secrets." The house prefers honesty. Be honest with the house. What the hell did that mean? I wanted to leave. God, I wanted to pack my bag and run. But when I looked out the window, my car wasn't there. I distinctly remembered parking in the gravel driveway, but the space was empty. I ran downstairs, checked the garage. My car was inside, but the keys weren't in my pocket. I tore apart my room looking for them, checked every surface, every drawer. They were sitting on the kitchen table, next to a note written in that same precise cursive. "You're not ready to leave yet." I tried the car anyway. Dead battery, completely drained despite being fine yesterday. My phone had no signal, as expected, but I'd been using the Wi-Fi. Except now, when I tried to connect, the network didn't appear. The router was still on, still showed activity lights, but my phone insisted there was no connection. I was trapped. That night, I lay in bed with every light in my room on, breaking Rule 3 deliberately. I didn't care anymore. If the house wanted me, it would have to take me with my eyes open. Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate. They stopped outside my door. A Polaroid slid under the gap at the bottom. I stared at it for a full minute before forcing myself to get up and look. It was me, from tomorrow. Based on the clothes and the lighting, it was daytime, and I was standing in the living room, holding a picture frame, looking at something with an expression of absolute terror. The photo was labeled on the back, Day 7. It was predicting the future, or dictating it. I don't think I slept after that. I just lay there, watching shadows move across the ceiling, listening to scratching sounds travel through the walls in patterns that felt almost like communication. When morning came, I did something desperate. I called 911. 911, what's your emergency? I'm trapped in a house at 1847 Ashwood Lane. I need help. Someone or something is. The line went dead. I tried again, same thing. When I checked my phone, the emergency call log showed I'd never dialed, like the house itself had erased the attempt. Day 7. The photo had shown Day 7, and I had to follow the script. Except I didn't. I refused to go to the living room. I stayed in my bedroom all day, pacing, refusing to play along with whatever this thing wanted. But around 2 p.m, I got hungry. So hungry I felt dizzy. I went to the kitchen, made a sandwich, and as I was eating, I noticed something on the wall in the dining room. A new photo, one I'd never seen before. It showed me at age 9, at my childhood home, playing in the backyard. My mother was in the background, alive, years before the cancer took her. I hadn't thought about that day in years, couldn't have, because I'd forgotten it existed. But seeing it there, in this house, displayed like a trophy, I grabbed it off the wall, and then I was in the living room, holding the frame, exactly as the Polaroid had shown, looking at my own childhood with horror, because I understood now what the house was doing. It wasn't just collecting photos, it was collecting moments, memories, lives. Every photograph was a piece of someone's existence, stolen and preserved. And the more we looked, the more we tried to understand, the more material we gave it to work with. The house was a camera, and we were the subjects being slowly exposed, developed, fixed into permanent images. My phone buzzed. Margaret Harrow, again. Thank you for being honest. The development process works best with truths. I'd thought I was refusing to cooperate, but every act of defiance, every moment of fear, every desperate attempt to understand it was all exactly what the house needed. My presence was the film, my emotions were the light exposure, and time was the developer fluid. I was being developed whether I wanted to be or not. That's when I started finding the notes from previous sitters. They were everywhere once I knew to look for them, tucked behind furniture, written on the backs of photos, scratched into windowsills. It feeds on presence. The longer you stay, the more real it becomes. Don't let it finish your album. The photographer is in the walls. And one that chilled me. I've been here 3 years. I forgot I was ever anyone else. 3 years? How was that possible? Unless time moved differently here. Unless the development process could be stretched, extended. The exposure lasting as long as the house wanted. I found a video camera in one of the spare bedrooms on day 8. Hidden under a bed. The battery was dead, but I charged it, hands shaking, and watched the corrupted footage. It showed someone, man or woman. I couldn't tell, running through the house, screaming. The audio was distorted, but I could make out fragments. It's developing me, can't stop. Seeing myself, everywhere, all the moments I've ever, becoming permanent, please. The footage cut to the living room. The person was standing in front of the fireplace, surrounded by photos of themselves at different ages, different moments, and behind them, reflected in the mirror above the mantel, was something tall and dark and wrong. The footage ended with a flash of light, like a camera shutter, and then static. I smashed the camera against the floor and immediately regretted it. That was evidence. That was proof. But proof for who? If the police never showed up when I called, if my car wouldn't start, if the house could make my own emergency calls disappear from existence, who would I show it to? Some of you are probably thinking, this is when I should have broken a window and run into the woods. I tried. I spent hours on day 9 systematically trying every exit. Windows wouldn't break, even when I hit them with furniture. Doors opened to reveal walls that shouldn't be there. The back door led to the front porch. The basement door, which was supposed to be locked, opened to the attic. The house was folding in on itself, rearranging space the way a photographer crops an image, deciding what to include and what to cut away. That night, all the photographs in the house changed at once. Every single image now showed only me. Me sleeping, me eating, me crying, me screaming, me trying to escape. Hundreds of photos, capturing every moment of my time here, displayed on every wall in chronological order. And at the end of the living room, above the fireplace, was a large empty frame waiting for the final shot. I stood there, staring at that empty space, and something clicked in my mind. I ran back to the attic because the house no longer cared if I broke the rules. The rules had been illusion, training wheels to make me think I had control. In the attic, I found the darkroom equipment. Real equipment, developing trays, enlargers, chemical baths, hanging lines, and in the corner, behind a curtain made of hanging photos, was a door I hadn't noticed before. The door led to a small room, walls covered in handwritten notes in multiple hands, spanning decades, a diary of trapped people trying to explain what they'd learned. I read them all, racing against time I could feel running out. The house was built by a photographer named Cornelius Harrow in 1847. He was obsessed with the idea that photographs captured souls, that the camera was a device for stealing and preserving the essence of a person. His journals reproduced on the walls by previous prisoners detailed his experiments. He'd built the house to function as a massive camera obscure, with the rooms arranged like the interior of a camera, the windows as apertures, the walls coated with light-sensitive chemicals he'd spent years developing. His goal was to create photographs that weren't just images, but actual preserved moments of reality. He succeeded. The house became his final and greatest project. After his death in 1876, the building itself continued his work autonomously, endlessly photographing anyone who stayed too long. Each person became part of its permanent collection, their consciousness and existence reduced to a series of images, trapped in an eternal loop of their most emotional moments. The families in the photos weren't posed, they were real people, still experiencing those moments forever. Every house sitter was another roll of film to be developed, another subject to be captured. And I'd seen my final photo being prepared. In a tray of developer fluid, still processing, was an image of me standing in the living room, face blank, eyes empty, surrounded by all my trapped moments, ready to join the permanent exhibition. I had maybe hours left before my development was complete, but here's what I learned from those wall notes. From the desperate knowledge passed down by previous prisoners, the house was a camera, which meant it followed the rules of photography: light, aperture, exposure, development, dot, and cameras could photograph themselves. Recursion, the infinite mirror effect. If I could turn the house's mechanism on itself, force it to capture its own image, it might create a feedback loop, an overexposure, burn out the process. The last readable note on the wall said, "The original camera is in the basement, find it." So I went down to the basement, because what else was I going to do? The basement door opened easily now. The stairs descended into darkness that felt thicker than it should, like the absence of light had texture. I used my phone flashlight, and the beam barely penetrated at the bottom. I found what I was looking for: Cornelius Harrow's original camera obscura setup, a massive wooden camera the size of a closet, with brass fittings and glass plates, and mechanical shutter systems that looked more like art than photography equipment. And loaded inside, never exposed, was a single glass plate. I understood. This was the original exposure, the founding image that gave the house its power. Harrow had never developed it, had died before completing the process. And the house had been trying to finish that first photograph for 150 years. Every person who entered became part of that unfinished image. Next to the camera was fresh developer fluid and a tray prepared, waiting. I could expose the plate, develop it, complete Harrow's work, or I could destroy it. But then I noticed what was actually on the plate: faint, ghostly, barely visible. It was an image of the house itself, taken from the outside, showing every window, every angle, every surface. A camera photographing itself. Harrow had tried to create a recursive exposure. He'd started it, but never finished. That's why the house was unstable. Why it needed constant new subjects. It was an incomplete self-portrait, an image that couldn't resolve. I had to finish it, but on my terms. I found film in a drawer, modern film, impossible, but nothing here obeyed normal rules. I loaded it into an old Polaroid camera sitting on a shelf, and I did something insane. I photographed the basement, the original camera, the plate, everything. The house reacted immediately. The wall started bleeding light, actual light leaking from cracks, like blood from a wound. Photo frames upstairs began shattering. I could hear them, dozens breaking at once. The scratching in the walls intensified into a roar. I took another photo, and another dot. Each flash seemed to cause pain. The house convulsed around me, floors tilting, walls rippling like water. I was creating new images faster than the house could develop them, forcing it to process more input than its mechanics could handle. The Polaroids came out whitewashed, overexposed, the images barely visible. I threw them into the developer fluid, and the chemical bath started boiling. From the tray rose whispers, hundreds of voices, the people trapped in the photos. They weren't screaming, they were thanking me. Finish it, they said. Burn it out. Overexpose. Set us free. I grabbed the original glass plate, the founder plate, and I photographed that. The flash was blinding. For a moment, I saw everything, every person who'd ever been trapped here. Every moment stolen, every life reduced to images. I saw Cornelius Harrow himself, not a ghost, but a photograph of a man who'd trapped himself in his own creation, unable to escape the camera he'd become. And I saw myself, all my possible futures, every version of me that existed in potential photographs. I saw the me who'd stay here forever, the me who'd become another face on the wall, the me who'd forget I was ever real. The glass plate cracked in my hands, light poured out, real light, warm and white and endless. The house shuddered, groaned, and then silence. I woke up in a hospital 3 days later. They told me I'd been found on the side of the road 2 towns over, unconscious, suffering from dehydration and exposure. No car, no wallet, just a single Polaroid clutched in my hand, overexposed almost to whiteness. But if you looked closely, you could see the outline of a Victorian house consuming itself in light. The police investigated. They said there was a fire at 1847 Ashwood Lane. Cause unknown, electrical maybe, that burned the entire structure to the foundation. No evidence of anyone named Margaret Harrow, current or historical, beyond the old newspaper clipping I'd found. No record of a house-sitting gig on any app. The money transfer never went through. I checked my bank account. Nothing. They asked if I'd been squatting in the house. Maybe doing drugs. Maybe having a mental health crisis. I told them I didn't remember. It was easier than trying to explain. Josh visited me in the hospital. He said I'd never texted him after arriving at the house, that he'd been worried when I went silent for 3 days. I showed him the texts on my phone, the conversations we'd had, his jokes about murder houses. They weren't there. Our message history ended the day before I accepted the job. I was released after a week of observation, clean bill of health, physically, mentally, ... Well, they recommended therapy. I went to 2 sessions and stopped. How do you explain this to someone who wasn't there? But here's the thing, I don't think I escaped. Sometimes, when I look at my phone's photo gallery, I see images I don't remember taking, not many. Just 1 or 2 per week. Photos of houses I've never visited, Victorian architecture, wraparound porches, tower rooms with widows' walks. And sometimes, I receive texts from blocked numbers. The next development is scheduled soon. Thank you for the exposure. The house remembers. Last week, I was scrolling through a house-sitting app, different account. But the algorithm apparently knows my preferences, and a listing appeared at the top of my feed. House sitter needed for Victorian estate. 3 weeks, $3,500. Must be comfortable with solitude and follow house rules. Different address, different name, same photograph of a hauntingly beautiful house that looked exactly like 1847 Ashwood Lane. I didn't click on it, but I noticed it had 3 5-star reviews, all posted in the last month, all saying, "Great experience, house was lovely, very clear communication." I've started collecting stories. If you're watching this, if you've ever house sat somewhere that felt wrong, if you've ever taken a job that paid too well, if you've ever found photos in your home that you didn't take, comment below. Tell me what you saw. Tell me what happened when you stayed too long. Because I think there are others, other houses, other cameras. Cornelius Harrow couldn't have been the only one obsessed enough to try this. And if his house could continue functioning for 150 years after his death, I keep finding new photos in my apartment. Not old ones from the house. New ones. Photos of me in locations I haven't visited yet, wearing clothes I don't own, doing things I haven't done. I think the development process isn't finished. I think when I burned out that house, I didn't escape the exposure. I just changed the photographer. I still have the Polaroid I was holding when they found me, the overexposed shot of the house consuming itself. Sometimes, in certain light, I can see figures in the windows, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all looking out. Some might be celebrating their freedom. Others might be warning me that freedom was never the option. Before you go, and I know this sounds paranoid, check your phone's photo gallery. Scroll to the very bottom, to your oldest photos. Look for images you don't remember taking, houses you've never visited, moments that feel like memories of a life you didn't live. If you find something, don't delete it, document it, screenshot it, because deletion doesn't remove the image from existence, it just removes your ability to see it developing. And if you ever see a house-sitting listing that seems too good to be true, that pays suspiciously well, that has rules about photographs or lights or honesty ... run ... or don't. Maybe you're curious, maybe you need the money, maybe you think you're different, that it won't happen to you. I thought that too. I'll see you in the next one, if I'm still here to make it, if I'm still me and not just a collection of moments waiting to be framed. Because the house may have burned down, but the photographer is still working, and the final exposure hasn't finished developing yet.